Hi, Joanne. It's Keith Broomfield here. Can you try your video and sound, please? Joanne, just to let you know, the meeting is live because we had to make sure it was going to work. So if you could test your video and sound, that would be good.
Hello, Keith. Can you hear us on this end of things? Can any
Joe,
of my
I don't know
colleagues
if
hear
you're
me?
talking at the moment, but we can't hear you.
Hi, Joe. I don't know if you can hear. I could hear you then, Joe.
Hi, Keith. Can you hear us okay? Are you able to hear us in the chamber?
Joe, can you hear me? Or Joe?
Can you try again, please?
How about now? Can you hear me now, Joe?
Yeah, we can hear you, Daniel. They just can't
Oh.
hear us in the chamber.
All right.
Hi, Joe. We're having problems hearing you. We're just wondering if you can try again, and perhaps if Daniel or Tanya can try so that we can see if it's you or whether it's our connection.
Yeah, I mean, we can hear you just fine, and I can hear Joe and Daniel just fine.
Okay, it's us then, because we can't hear you. We're going to have to check with our IT and get back to you.
Tanya, are you
Thanks.
getting all of the audio?
I am getting everybody, yes.
I can't hear your audio at all.
That's weird.
Yeah, I can hear Joe, but I don't think Joe can hear me.
Hold on, maybe I have to change my speakers. Okay, try again. Yeah, I think I'll be able to hear this. Say something.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Okay. Okay, great. And Keith could hear you?
They said they can't, well, I mean, whoever was responding could hear, but they said they couldn't hear in the chamber.
Okay. Was Keith gonna try and
Yeah, they're trying to, well, she said they were going to try to call IT. I'm not sure how that would work.
Okay.
We're just doing a quick sound test. Can someone dialing in through Zoom just speak for a second, just so we can make sure we can hear you?
Good evening. This is Joe Mortensen.
Joe, that's perfect. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to hand you back over.
Super.
In the absence of a chair and a vice chair for the meeting, may I ask for a nomination for a chair, please? Is that agreed? Okay, Councillor Kingston, would you like to take a seat?
Firstly, good evening and welcome to this Scrutiny panel meeting number 1 on tackling of cost of living crisis. Just be aware that it is a hybrid meeting. Some members and officers are joining us online, and it'll also be going out live on YouTube. Anyone offline, could you please, anyone online, could you please hit the mute button, and if you want to say anything, could you please raise the hand button. Have we got any apologies? So far, I've got councillors Alexander, Brett, Jassel, Kumar, and Tag. Councillor Conti will be substituting for Councillor Kumar. I'll be substituting for Councillor Alexander. Councillor Murtaz will be substituting for Councillor Brett, and Councillor Summers will be substituting for Councillor Tag. Of urgent matters, I haven't been informed of any. Declarations of interest. Do any members have to declare if they've got any personal or prejudicial interest in any matters on the agenda? Matters to be considered in private. I haven't been informed of any matters that should be considered in private. Just moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting. We all agreed that they are accurate. Great, okay, move on. We'll just move on to the main bit of the meeting. Support available to residents to aid the reduction of utility bills. At this point, I'd like to welcome Joanne Mortensen, Climate Action Programme Manager, who will take members through the report, which provides a panel with an overview, the support of Ealing residents to become more energy efficient and the reduction of utility bills. I believe you're presenting it online.
That's right. Thank you, Councillor Kingston. And thank you for the opportunity to present to our members about the work that our team is doing to support our residents through the cost of living crisis. My team is here with me tonight. I have Tanya Jennings and Daniel Mepham. They are both specifically charged with working on domestic energy for our residents. And they're going to be contributing significantly to the presentation tonight. And they've done a lot of the work of putting the paper together to present you with the information of how Ealing is approaching assisting residents on affordable warmth and fuel poverty. This evening, I'm just going to take a little bit of time to set the context. I run the climate action program for the council. So our team owns the climate action strategy, which I hope you all are familiar with. It was adopted in January of 2021 by Cabinet. We identified 5 priorities within that strategy for us. And I would suggest that all 5 of those priorities have some interlinkage to the cost of living crisis and helping our residents get through it. And so it's sort of a co-benefit to work on climate change and to help our residents financially and economically through these times. So I'm hoping that we can see the alignment between the issues and obtain even greater benefits by working on both carbon reduction and assisting the economics of families and other residents within the borough. So the 5 themes as outlined in the paper and the strategy are energy, food, nature, travel, and waste. Energy is a significant proportion of what my team works on. We have a long history of working on energy efficiency programs and affordable warmth programs over the years. And this has evolved with various trends within the industry, within the sector, the sustainability and climate change sector, as well as different sort of political influences and persuasions over time. And right now, it's abundantly clear that climate change and the climate emergency that we are operating within right now is a key priority. It has been identified as one of the top 3 priorities of Ealing Council. And we're working across services to embed our activity to ensure that we are walking the walk of climate action across all of the work that we do. The energy area of our climate change strategy, the chapter that deals specifically with energy, we look at 3 different objectives for that, and we sort of approach it in 3 different ways. The first is recognizing the importance of energy efficiency and the performance of our existing buildings and what a profound impact that will have to make sure that we address improve the efficiency and the performance of these buildings. The second is to ensure that any new buildings that are built within our boundaries are of an excellent performance rating, so that we don't have to go back and retrofit those buildings in the future. And that includes both domestic and commercial premises within the council. And a lot of that is in the hands of our development community and our planning regulations. So you'll see in the local plan a lot of that strengthening of influence and activity coming through there. And then the final strand or objective of our strategy is to make sure that renewable energy continues to play a really strong role, actually grows in its ability to help us through. And I think we're seeing that in this moment that renewable energy also has a big role to play with helping our residents through the cost of living crisis. So outlined in the paper, just working through, we know that, as I mentioned, a massive priority for us is to retrofit buildings and retrofit homes specifically. We know that 80% of the buildings that will be around in 2050 already are around. And so this is a huge multi-decade piece of work for ourselves and the entire sort of sector of trades and different skills and economies to work toward. So it's a huge sort of system change that's starting to occur right now. And we have two main areas that we've been working on with the current programs. One, well, maybe I would say three actually. So one is the retrofitting of the home, the fabric of our homes, the sort of insulating that we all might be familiar with, to make sure that our homes and our walls, our windows, our rooftops are all insulated to the greatest degree possible, and also ventilated, so that we don't get the damp problems that might occur when you're doing that very good insulation on a home. And then so that's the second component, is working on the heating system, the heating and ventilation system. And you'll hear and you'll read in the paper that the big push is around decarbonizing heating systems. So that is making sure that we change the way that we heat our homes away from the burning of fossil fuels and towards cleaner sources of heating our homes. And the big push at the moment is through air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. So using either electricity or the natural heat of the earth to heat homes instead of burning natural gas to do so. And this has a benefit of reducing our produced carbon emissions as well. So you hear a lot about that. And I would say the third piece of that is really educating our residents and helping them understand the importance of all of this and the resources that are available to help them to make this transition with us and to understand the why we're doing it. And this, as I mentioned a moment ago about the sort of the co-benefits of all of this, this has tremendous impact on the health of our communities. So we're doing a lot of work with public health right now to tie these two pieces together. And we actually have a long history of working with them. Some of our initial funding for some of our early programs came from the Department of Public Health, because they recognize that warm homes are healthier homes. Warm winter homes are healthier homes. We also, in our strategy, try to connect this localized discussion of heating our homes back to the sort of the global vision. So we tie it back to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are the four goals that we've tied it to are the affordable and clean energy goal, which is goal 7, goal 9, which is around industry, innovation, and infrastructure, which ties back to that the information I spoke about around the green skills and growing that economy of actually the providers that will, the sector that will help us reach our goals. Goal 11, which is around sustainable cities and communities, and of course, Goal 13, which is climate action. So it's important to us to try and tie this to sort of, the planetary discussion, the global discussion on the importance of this issue. We have a number of programs that some of them are new and some of them have been in existence for quite a while. So this is where I'm going to call on my team that's with me this evening. So I'm going to ask Tanya Jennings, who is our Principal Domestic Energy Officer and has been working with the Council for several years on really developing some deep assistance for residents and making sort of access available to new programs for our residents as well in recent years. And she's going to talk to you about those recent programs for a few minutes. And then she's going to hand it over to Daniel Meckham, who is our Domestic Energy Officer in the team. And he's going to talk to you about our Ealing specific program called Healthy Homes Ealing. So Tanya, if you'd like to come on in, thank you very much.
Theoretically, there we go. Great. Hi, I'm Tanya. So one of the biggest programs that we're running right now is called the Green Homes Grant. There's a second phase of Green Homes Grant that we're just starting really soon, which is called the Home Upgrade Grant. These two grant programs together offer energy efficiency grants to residents that can be either owner occupiers or landlords who are applying on behalf of eligible tenants. Ealing are leading a 13 borough coalition. So almost all of West London and Newham have joined under our coalition umbrella. And we've had just over 40 million pounds of funding. So far, we've spent just about 10 million of that funding, maybe a little bit over 10 million. And we're projecting that we'll probably, hopefully, be able to spend about 50% of what's remaining. There are some barriers to delivering this program, primarily around supply chain. Cost of living is also affecting cost of goods, cost of works. Just as one example, one of the measures we offer is external wall insulation. That used to be an average of 10 to 12,000 pounds per home. We're now looking at more like 16 to 18,000. So even in the less than 2 years that we've been running these schemes, we've seen a really substantial increase in price. As a general overview of what Green Homes Grant does, it's aimed at low-income homeowners. So for us, low income means 30 to 35,000 pounds annually or less. Pensioners, people with disabilities, we do have a wee bit of officer discretion to try to help people get into the program, whether that's because they're in an area of multiple deprivation, an area of fuel poverty. We're looking more and more in the future towards more area-based approaches because we're finding that income is not a great metric right now when the costs of everything are really hard to be met by your income, even if you're at the top end of what we consider low income. So some of our borough partners have also put forward social housing under Green Homes Grant. Ealing has put forward about 100 homes, but I think only probably 30 to 50 of those will actually receive works in the allotted time scales. So our current funding is through March of 2023. We are looking at options for future funding. The GLA has a program called the Warmer Homes, which has used some Green Homes Grant funding. They opted out of the phase 2 fund that we had and are now picking it back up with phase 3 after skipping that delivery window. So there is a program being built by GLA. It's a little bit more in its infancy compared to what we've built in Ealing because we've been delivering since January 2021. So just about a year and a half of actual delivery has been happening. So far we've reached about 700 homes. We think we'll reach about that many again before March. And then after March, we have some decisions that we're trying to make about whether or not we go ahead with another coalition bid, if we join back in with the GLA and kind of let them take the lead, but still do our own advertising. So there are some options for that. we have until, I believe, the 11th of November to submit a bid or not. So we'll be looking into that quite a bit. So Green Homes Grant is the primary one that we're chasing right now, because that funding lets us go out to private homeowners and renters, where the social housing decarbonization fund is specifically, as it says on the tin, for social houses. So we have a social housing demonstrator project, which many of you will know as Energy Sprong. That's our whole house retrofit program, where we're doing 68 retrofits across the Village Park estate. So we have a couple £1 million of social housing decarbonization fund demonstrator funding. There is a second wave of that program that's open now, or well, this week it's opened up for bidding again with an 11th of November deadline. So we are putting in a bid for that. It's a minimum of 100 homes. We're actually aiming for something more like 300 or 400 homes of our Ealing owned properties to receive measures. It does have a small amount that can be used for leaseholders or freeholders who are attached to our social properties. So we are exploring, again, some options for people who've maybe exercised their right to buy and not been able to afford to make any improvements since that went through. If we can extend the grant offer to them to help bring not just our own properties, but entire rows or blocks up to the standard that we're aiming for, which across most of these schemes, we're aiming for an EPC of C. Most of them, you have to be a D or below to be eligible. So we're trying to help not just our own social properties, but those around us to make that leap into C, which is, it's comfortable, C for comfortable, a low comfortable. You might still need to have some jumpers and blankets around, but compared to some of our residents who are living in E, F, and G rated homes, who will see their energy bills more than triple this year, we're really focused on trying to get everybody up to a C so that we can mitigate against the price rises. So those are the big ones. I'm happy to take more questions after Daniel's explained a little bit about the Healthy Homes program and how these all kind of interact together. So Daniel, I'll hand over to you if you are ready.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Tanya. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, as Tanya just mentioned, I'll be talking to you a little bit about our Healthy Homes Ealing program, which is really the kind of the first kind of protocol that we want all our Ealing residents to know about, to understand that the support is there for them and specific to Ealing residents with energy concerns and that sort of stuff. So as I mentioned, it is specific to Ealing residents and it's funded by the Affordable Warmth Reserve. But we do deliver in partnership with London-wide charity Groundwork. I believe they've been delivering the scheme for the last few years, I believe. So yeah, this is kind of my first year of delivering on this, but yeah, I believe the Groundwork were the delivery partners for previous few years. So the way residents can access this is they can be referred into the scheme, make a self-referral, or be screened for a visit when using the Healthy Homes Ealing advice line. And just to go into a little bit more detail, so there's two main sections to this scheme really, which is the advice line, which is a free phone telephone line, which is open from Monday to Friday, and that's open to all Ealing residents. And then in addition to this, there's also offers in-home or telephone consultations. For this, for a resident to be eligible for this, there's certain criteria. So it's if the resident is considered to be in fuel poverty. So the way we define that is by spending more than 10% of income on heating the home. The resident could be over 65 or in a home with children under the age of 10 on a means tested benefit, and either or maybe disabled or long-term sick. So that's the split, but I'll go into a little bit more on those now. So the advice line, as I say, it's a free phone line and it's operated by trained energy advisors, and they can offer free impartial advice on energy bills, tariffs, suppliers, managing fuel debt and arrears, advice on insulating homes, and any available grants or financial assistance that there may be. And again, so that advice line is free to use for all Ealing residents, and that's the kind of telephone line that we really want to be out there and get residents understanding that that's the kind of support that's available for them. Now, in addition to that is the in-home or telephone consultations. So it was prior to the pandemic, it was primarily or solely in-home consultations, but with the restrictions and lockdown, we managed to kind of alter the service to accommodate for that and introduce telephone consultations. So these consultations, they're carried out by green doctors who are energy experts who are a part of groundwork. And the consultations, so they assess the energy use in the home, so eligibility for larger energy efficiency measure installations under other available grants. So they also speak to the resident and understand their needs for perhaps onward referral to different, as I say, grants or different support methods. Need for assistance with managing arrears, and they also install small energy efficiency measures, so such as reflective radiator panels, LED bulbs, and draft proofing to kind of do those kind of small fixes that may make the resident more comfortable or reduce the amount of money they have to spend on heating the home. So the telephone consultations, they do check all this as well, but of course they won't be able to install these small measures. So if there is, if an individual is unable to install these measures themselves, then a follow-up appointment is arranged so that the green doctors can come around and install those measures. So yeah, so both the advice line and consultations, so they both look to refer residents into other schemes and signpost them to different locations for advice or support. So the uptake, just to kind of understanding of the kind of numbers that we're talking about, the residents supported. So in the previous year, we've supported our 300 consultations that were contracted were exceeded. So we delivered 300 consultations, and this has then this has led to us extending the contract for this coming year to 500 consultations with a blend of in-home and telephone consultations again. So yeah, so that extension is now being it's gone through, and we're looking to push the advice line and referral information to other council colleagues and frontline staff at the council, so that this kind of support measure is in place or in the front of their minds when they're discussing with residents that they may understand could benefit from this. And yeah, so that's essentially the Healthy Homes Ealing service that we offer at the council. So if I could just pass back to Joe.
Super. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Tanya. So that's an overview of the programs that we have currently for our residents. And just to move on to the funding a little bit, we're very much sort of at the whim of central government funding. So over the past couple of years, it's really been flourishing. There have been some commitments around climate change and decarbonization, which have provided a somewhat consistent stream of funding into those programs. Not always consistent rules as or boundaries, as Tanya mentioned. Some of the complexities of delivery have been because the schemes tend to sort of chop and change, meaning that we have to be quite dynamic, both as officers and with our supply chain, to make sure that we're conforming with those rules and reporting in the right ways. But we've managed to sort of make a lot of good things happen with the funding that's been available, and we've been very, very successful in achieving that. The grant fund bids due really to the team that you've got in front of you tonight. And we also do a lot of collaborative activity, as Tanya mentioned, with our West London partners. So working across borough boundaries and with the GLA. So we're working to try and access even bigger pots of money where that's feasible and desirable. And we've got this underpinning, as Daniel said, with our Healthy Homes Ealing program of council-funded activity, and that has actually just remained quite steady over the. I believe that we've been delivering that for 8 years, and our budget for that is a little bit from our central budgets. And when I say a little bit, I mean a very little bit. It's I think we have about £42,000 a year that is from our general fund, and the rest of that is from some reserve that we've had over time. So perhaps that leads us into some of the recommendations and the challenges that we've discussed in this paper. One of the challenges is the inconsistency of programmatic funding, sort of that long-term lead-in that really allows us to put supply chain in place, to build sort of the skills and economy piece of it, to just deliver a program that we know we can talk about in a consistent manner with our residents, that isn't nuanced and complex for them to understand how to access. But like I said, we've been doing the best that we can, and I think that it's reading really well from residents. They're understanding what the programs are and what their opportunities to access these funds are. But the obviously we had the pandemic in there as well, which also gave us another complicated little bit to get started. But hopefully we're through the worst of that, and we can get on with this sort of the consistency of delivery. And then of course there is the commitment that we need to potentially look at as a council of making financially to growing the program and making sure that we have that consistent offering for our residents, because we have committed to really facing this climate crisis head on, and energy efficiency is one of the biggest pieces. I don't want to call it the easiest piece, but we really know what needs to be done. It's the most sort of clear-cut piece in terms of we know the task ahead of us, and we know that it will take great investment, and particularly for our most vulnerable residents. It's a duty of ours to help them through this, and to ensure that they're both addressing their carbon footprint, as well as just being able to sustain their lives and their health during these very difficult times. So I think that brings us through to maybe some opportunities for cross-council working. I hope that it's coming across from my team that we've worked very hard to knit in with other services in terms of other referral networks. So working closely with the adults and children's teams to make sure that when anyone's in a home, that they're, the energy is at the forefront of their mind as well. If we can be helpful in that way, that we can sort of make these cross connections across services. We've done a lot with the handy person scheme in terms of making sure that people that have returned from hospital stays, they return to a warm home, that they aren't going to, sort of come back into a environment that isn't healthy for them to recover, make a full recovery and stay healthy. And we've also worked with the public health team, as I mentioned earlier, quite closely to make sure that the programs and the funding streams that they see on the horizon that are available, that we can tie these together and be most efficient with our work and most impactful with our work as well. And we've also started to do, as I said, that important piece about communication and education with our residents. So getting information out to our community hubs, our libraries, places where people gather, and trying to make sure that that information is available to them so that they understand how to access these resources in many different ways, because we understand that, not everyone is on Twitter, and the website can sort of be difficult to navigate for some of our audiences. So we're just trying to make sure that we're hitting it at multiple levels as well, so that the communication is really as strong as it can possibly be. And finally, I don't know if either Tanya or Daniel mentioned this, I don't think that they did, but we've also, over the last several years, been doing a lot of internal training to our own council staff members to make sure, I think Tanya's line is to put on our own air masks first, so that we can identify the challenges of, affordable warmth and potentially identifying fuel poverty, possibly in our own lives, or if this is a personal struggle for us at the moment, but also in the work that we do, so that we can begin to sort of bring those messages together across a lot of different services. So that leads me to the end of the presentation, which is just to summarize with some recommendations that are within the paper towards the end there. We talk about making a recommendation around putting our hands in our own pockets. I know that that's a difficult ask, but potentially giving us some more certainty and consistency of being able to design and deliver programs that are impactful for our residents. We can do some more work on tying up with other services. We'd love to hear from our counselors about any ideas you might have there for better working we can do there, perhaps in your own surgeries. There could be ways of spreading more information. We will obviously be reaching out for more money from all of the sources that are available to us from central government and any others that sort of that become available. Sometimes there's little pockets of funding from energy companies or energy networks. So we'll continue to do that, but we need to make sure that we're growing the funding that we have available to then transfer to our residents to assist them, and then also really making sure that our own homes that we have authority over, our social housing, is the best it can possibly be. So next week we have a new net zero project manager that will start with us in Ealing, and so we'll have even a little closer bond between our teams and the housing team to make sure that these programs of work are really, as I said a moment ago, impactful, and that we have a really clear plan for how we're going to improve those homes and make sure that our own social housing residents are also being looked after in this crisis. And then I think probably an area of innovation, really, because it's an area that doesn't have a clear answer at the moment, is the people that fall outside of the income guidance that we are often sort of having to work within, because a lot of our programs are around affordable warmth and therefore have caps of how much income. But I think we need to recognize that perhaps just outside of that, and probably getting further outside of that income cap, we're going to see a lot of those families struggling as well. And what can we do in an innovative way to make sure that they are also getting access to programs that can assist them? So you'll find those summarized in a recommendation section. And now I'm going to hand it over back to the chair, Councillor Kingston. If you'd like to perhaps call for some questions, or if there's any further discussion that we can help with, we would be delighted to.
Thank you very much, Joe. Firstly, I'll open this up for questions. I'll take it in tranches of 3, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose my first question is really about this. I mean, it's fantastic, the work that's being done and some of the initiatives that we're driving to support residents, but the numbers still seem quite small in terms of how many people we can help. And I just wondered where we are with what sort of percentage of people we think we are able to reach at the moment. And if we carried on at this sort of pace, how long would it take us to make a serious impact across the borough? So that's my first question. And then one other one for now, which is in the paper, I'm just going to check the page number. On page 22, there's a list of services that can support people, including the eco for low carbon home service, etc. How many of those can we as councillors directly talk to residents about and say, well, why don't you phone this number? And how many of them, maybe that isn't a good idea for us to do. I just wanted to clarify that as well. Thanks.
Councillor Conti, please.
Thank you. That was a really, really interesting presentation, and it was really great to hear about all the good work that your team are doing. I've got a few questions, but I guess start with two initially. I guess the thing that struck me with this is how expensive, obviously, doing all the retrofitting is. And I think the grants were £10,000 a time, and it was just, I think your colleague mentioned that it was £10,000 just for getting some insulation put in. So I know somewhere in the report that lists all the possible things that could be done to homes. So I guess really, what would be the cost? Or I guess it's difficult because different homes need different things, but on average, what would be the cost if you wanted to optimally insulate a house? How much actually would it cost? Because it seems like £10,000 only sort of scratches the surface. And then in terms of sort of, you mentioned that you're now aiming to get so the properties that you do work with to get them up to a category C, for example, from, I think you were saying a lot of them might be D or E grade or below. What would that equate to as a savings? If you are a category E home in terms of efficiency and go up to C, what would that resident save on average on an energy bill? So how much more does that make it? How much more efficient is that house in terms of retaining heat? Those are my first two questions, but maybe later if I can ask a few.
Cooley.
Thank you for this presentation. I can see the hard work and the passion that you've put into this. And I welcome all these solutions, but residents are simply not, majority of the residents are not aware of this. And secondly, if they're not aware of it, they're not going to try to access it because they're not aware of it. What are you doing to increase the awareness? Maybe there could be a lot more articles on a monthly basis in the Around Ealing magazine, which has a circulation of 130,000. Thank you.
Hi, Joe, do you want to address those first, right?
I will. Okay, so I'm going to ask for some help from Tanya as well. I was just going to say to the third question that came in around increasing awareness and so they access the programs. I mean, that's a huge push for us right now. And just a couple of hours ago, Tanya just said we need, every week to be in the newsletter so that it's just it's impossible to miss, really. And also not just the digital side, but as I said, I think we need to be looking at, the methods that, for instance, Let's Go South Hall are employing by, sending it into the networks of people so that it's word of mouth and so that we, are using other ways of getting that message across, because sadly, not everyone is reading that newsletter every week. But you're right, we do try to get articles in Around Ealing as frequently as we possibly can, and then reinforcing that with the weekly newsletter and the social media as well. But there's always more work to do around communications and getting this message out there. I'm going to hand back to Tanya to address the councillor's question about the small numbers. It's a big effort for what looks like small numbers, but I'm going to send that to Tanya to discuss about how long that journey might take. And then also ideas around the costing and the savings to residents in terms of improving efficiency.
Sure. The numbers are small. There's no denying. I think when we first made these bids in late 2020, just before the pandemic, we thought we were going to deliver 800 homes in the first year. When we put in our second bid, we thought we would deliver 1,600 homes. And then the real effects of Brexit happened and COVID happened. And a huge proportion of our supply chain went back to their homes in Europe or got very sick. A lot of people retired. There was a time where government released a voucher scheme for Green Homes Grant and then very quickly canceled it. And a lot of businesses that had ramped up efforts to take advantage of that funding actually went under. So unfortunately now the biggest challenges that we have are around supply chain. We have so much funding, kind of an obscene amount of funding in a good way for the first time in a really long time for grant funding, not necessarily for running the programs, but in terms of grants we can offer. But we don't have the supply chain to deliver. So even though we have been flat out running this program for 18 months, a little bit more than 18 months now, we managed to get 323 people through the first phase of Green Homes Grant, again, where we thought we would do 800. Our phase 2 program actually ends this week. I don't have the exact numbers yet, but I think it's going to be around 400. Going forward into our final stage that we have funding for right now, we are aiming for 1,200, but again, we've reforecast at 50% because there just isn't the supply chain. So there's two pieces to that. We're doing a huge amount of work with the supply chain across all 13 boroughs, but specifically in Ealing, we're working really closely with our colleagues on the economic growth team, our reskilling, upskilling, education teams. We have partnerships with West London College. We have partnerships with Elmhurst Energy, Retrofit Academy. So a lot of these different organizations, and we're trying to emulate some good works that have been done in places like Hounslow, where they've done almost training triages, where you get a number of people into a room, you give them a maths test, an English test, a computer test, and then figure out what's their base skills and are they ready to go into one of these training programs to work in the green sector, or do they need some remedial training and education first? So we're trying to emulate some programs like that to get more people in, and that's great for the long term. In the short term, we really just have to use the supplier network that exists today. And all we can do is I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and other places like that, trying to connect with people in the networks, through our grant programs, through our friends across the boroughs. So I think we're making some good progress, but I think we're all aware that it's not where we would like to be. I will say, though, that for our phase 1 funding, we're one of 3 coalitions in the entire country that managed to spend all of our money. So while sometimes it feels like a great loss, actually, I know that we're doing better than almost anybody else. And it will be the same for phase 2. Very few, if anyone, spent all of their funding. We just have a lot because we're quite good at getting it. We were really ambitious. It didn't work out as great as we did, but I know that for the homes that we did reach, it was really super. So I guess just a little bit about where there's a 2-part to this as well. The why can't we spend more and what would you spend it on? The upcoming grants are a little bit higher grant amounts for off-gas properties. Unfortunately for Ealing and most of the coalitions that we're part of, about 90% of our homes are heated by gas. It's a huge issue. We're well aware of it. I was actually just speaking with our housing colleagues this morning about how to get some comms out about what our ambitions are for getting people off of gas. We've definitely seen these challenges with programs like Energy Sprong, where we've had residents turn us down because they don't want to get rid of our gas, and having clear messaging to say, it's not a question of if we will get you off gas, but when. That our climate commitments do not involve keeping homes on gas. Everybody's coming off of gas. So we're working on those pieces of it, but 10,000 pounds doesn't go very far. Even the 25,000 that the coldest homes are eligible for under the HUG program, that's really still not enough, especially when you look at the cost of EWI, the cost of air source heat pumps has gone up wildly. it's very much an installer's market right now. They can sort of name their own prices. Mitsubishi and Valiant control how many air source heat pumps they create a year. We don't. So some of those technologies, despite all of the programs from government to try to get people to use them, there's a 6 to 9 month waiting list just to get an air source heat pump. So these are really some challenges. So what we've been focusing our efforts on are targeting cavity wall properties, empty lofts. Unfortunately, every energy efficiency program for the past decade has targeted those same people. We don't have very many empty cavities and lofts left. There's a few, but as an example, out of the first 3,000 people who have applied to Green Homes Grant through our scheme alone, we had 28 properties that needed cavity wall insulation. Most of the people coming to us are in solid wall properties, and there's very little we can do that would be classified as kind of low-hanging fruit. And we're getting a lot of pressure from government. Well, why aren't you doing more cavity wall? Why aren't you doing more lofts? It's not for lack of trying. We've probably sent out 100,000 letters to residents specifically targeting those areas, but they're not coming back to us because they're relatively low expense measures. So if you're even a little bit willing and able to pay, that's going to be the first thing you do. It's everything else. It's replacing single glazing, replacing doors, insulating extensions and room and roofs, things like that are a lot more expensive, that are harder. So it's challenging for us to make recommendations because we kind of know almost everybody's going to want external wall insulation, but it's 4 to 6 weeks on site for traditional EWI. We probably have 5 or 6 teams delivering for our program, which means we can do, if we're lucky, about 20 per month right now, where we have literally hundreds of applications asking for it. So at the end of the scheme, we know that we're going to have to turn away people in solid wall properties or refer them on to future schemes, which is really difficult for everyone. So for quite a while, for several months, we actually had a moratorium on advertising the scheme because we had such a long waiting list. But we've actually started opening it back up to applications, specifically trying to find those sort of rapid measures, the cavity walls and the loft insulations. So we've only just opened that up in about the last 2 weeks. So we've changed the Around Ealing articles to say that we're now accepting applications. So even if they find an older article that said that applications were closed, that's now been changed. So they'll see that it's open again. Which goes to the other question about our little flow chart and matrix of who you can refer people to. I would say you can actually refer residents into any of those programs except for LEAP, not because they aren't taking applications, but because someone on a Facebook group that had something like 1 million residents shared their direct line number the other day, and they had thousands and thousands of people calling in who didn't actually qualify because it's a scheme aimed at low-income people. So they've now shut off their referral network to anyone who isn't a referral partner. But for the most part, the others are there and available. One of the programs, the energy company obligation, is primarily aimed at low-income people. There's a little bit of flexibility. That's it's an old scheme that's just entered a new phase with much more complicated points of entry, is a nice way to put it. There's spreadsheets and checklists. So it's not just if you meet this income, you qualify. It's if you meet this income and you're in this bracket of EPC and you have this type of walls. So it is open. We are working on building a network to try to help people navigate that process. A new article actually just came out yesterday from one of our trusted partners on how local authorities can help people access that. So Daniel and I just got it for the first time yesterday. We've not had a chance to read through it properly yet, but we will be implementing some of the advice there to help people get into it. We're also working on a demystifying energy efficiency measures booklet, which is quite nearly done. And I realize I've been saying that for some time, but the reason that's been delayed goes back to the final question about savings. we have previously spoken about what these measures will save you. Energy Strong is a great example of that. When we tendered for it and bid for it and told Cabinet about it, we thought people would probably save £300 to £500 a year. That was before energy prices tripled. I actually can't guarantee any of the residents that are receiving that a savings now. So we've really had to change our messaging about kilowatt hour savings, not money savings. And through all of our comms over the next indefinable period of time, you will see us talking about kilowatt hour savings, not money, because I can't tell you what Eon will charge you. I can't tell you what British Gas will charge you, but what I can tell you is how to get how much energy your home needs down to an easier to manage level. And hopefully then, if people make these improvements at some point in the future, if prices do stabilize, then they would see a savings. Our message is really that the kilowatt hour that you never have to buy is the cheapest. So the best thing you can do, even if it's a small drought proofing measure, or using your microwave or your kettle or your crock pot instead of turning on your gas, those will always be cheaper. So we're redoing the booklet to take out kind of the promises of savings and to instead put in kilowatt hour savings. We'll be doing quite a bit of comms where we can get them on that. And we've got an article coming out on the Around Ealing website that wasn't able to get into this magazine, but about the price cap, how that affects people, what it really means. Unfortunately, the £2,500 cap doesn't mean you'll never be charged more than $2,500. That's based on average use. And if your use is above average or your home is colder than average, that does not mean that that's the cap for you. And that's going to be some further really hard messaging to get through to our residents that unfortunately some of them will be the exception to the rule.
And just to add to that, I would say it's cost avoidance as well, right? It's avoiding future costs where that, it's again about finding that messaging that resonates for the residents. And Daniel, you were also just in a quick message. You also had an addition there.
Yeah, so really, as we've discussed before, the Healthy Homes Ealing helpline, we're really looking to make that kind of a one-stop shop for all residents. So if that's the kind of the primary kind of number or contact we want to get out there, because once residents call that number, the advisors will kind of have an idea or knowledge in their head of which schemes and which routes would be best for that particular resident. So that's really the kind of one, if we had to say, we want you to direct people to one place, it would be that Healthy Homes Ealing number. Just, that was all.
So I can do another round of questions. Councillor Hirsch is the next one.
Thank you. It's probably very similar to Councillor Martin's, just looking from a slightly different angle, because I wondered how big is actually the problem? So have we got, so to speak, a target? We've got X amount of housings which are below the C rating. And then from these X amount of houses, we've got X percent we assume are lower income. So I wonder actually how big is our objective, target, aim at the end? And how close are we getting? And how long it will take us roughly to kind of really achieve that, thinking that our 2030 kind of aim is pretty much around the corner when we think in these numbers.
Any further questions? Councillor Coley and Councillor Conti.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, it was mentioned that external insulation has gone up from 10,000 to 16,000. I do understand that material cost and labor cost has gone up. But have we not considered, has any consideration been given for internal insulation, where you internally insulate all the external walls? One, that can be done by many people. It's not a very skilled task. But obviously what I'm not sure about, does it achieve a good, I certainly know that it does increase the EPC rating if you do that, but why is that not being considered? Is it because it's not as energy efficient as you would like it to be, or is there any other reason? Thank you.
Thank you. One of my questions on planning. I think at the beginning, you mentioned about obviously working, or the borough trying to get applications that are fit, I guess, are fit for the future. I guess, do you have any figures on, in terms of the number of applications that are approved that meet the, you know, the standards that you've got in terms of sort of energy efficiency, et cetera, and being more future proof? My second question was on, oh yes, sorry, it was on the, I can't remember the name of the scheme, the one where they, where you do the health, like the health consultation with the green doctors. It was, so it was 300 consultations this year, 500 next year, or this current year. What is the demand? So, because obviously not everyone who rings will then get a consultation. I was just wondering, currently you turning people away, is 500 enough? Actually, do you need more than that? And in terms of sort of accessing people who maybe English isn't their first language, are these provided, or, you know, are translators available? Are there ways to support people in the borough who maybe don't speak English in order so they can benefit from the scheme as well? Thanks.
Sorry, I meant to share some figures with you earlier. We have a portfolio project tool by a company called Parity Projects that lets us look at our stock. We have about 140,000-ish homes in Ealing, 145,000. Of those, like I said, about 90% are solid wall properties. Ealing Council owns 4% of those, which is not great, really, because all we can do is influence the market for things like EWI. I ran a wizard tool last year to say what would it take to get us to an EPC of B across all of our stock. That was £202 million just for the Ealing owned properties, and that's 15,000 homes. So we basically need to be spending £28 million a year for the next 7 years to hit our climate targets just for our Ealing owned properties. When I ran it for the whole borough, I think it was 4.2 billion. I don't think we have that much ourselves. So this is one of the reasons that we're running programs like Green Homes Grant that help us to reach out to private households, to encourage landlords. I know that the PRS team, the private rental team, have just got some minimum energy efficiency standard funding to have a MEES officer to help landlords to understand what are the obligations, how is that going to change, what programs are available, including our own. They're really daunting figures, and I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat that. We need loads of money and loads of humans, and what we don't have is time. You know, a lot of these targets aim for 2050, which is about 20 years after the house is burned down, as we saw this summer with our 40-degree weather. So, you know, we really are, we're eating a giant something, and everybody's got to start chewing. And so whether that's, you know, you can only do some small drought measures, you can do some really big projects. We've partnered with companies like EcoFurb to help our willing and able to pay residents to access these works. I can't speak to how many planning applications have come through that meet our goals, but we are doing quite a lot of education pieces with the planning team. They're very involved in our scheme. I do have to say that we're really pleased with how often they turn up to our meetings and conversations. So I think that, you know, they're on the side of right. Unfortunately, our ability to enforce beyond the London plan, beyond national building standards, is very limited. All we can do is say, you know, that's great, but have you considered these other measures? So briefly about the EWI versus IWI, internal wall insulation is great. It's just as expensive as EWI. It's much more disruptive because you've got to clear rooms to do it. I'm not opposed to it. You know, we're looking at a lot of IWI projects in our conservation area homes because it's just near impossible to do anything to the outside. So we are looking at it, but if you don't want to lose a good chunk of your internal wall, you have to use the more expensive products like aerogel, which are 2 or 3 times more expensive than just a sort of standard wool block. So we do help residents to try to understand these differences. We're always looking for different resources that we can share with them. And our comms over the next 6 months to a year will be really centered on what does this measure do for you? You know, both in terms of the carbon savings, the kilowatt hour savings, but how disruptive is it? You know, is it something that you could do room by room? Where I suppose the advantage to the external wall when we do it is that you do it all at once and then it's done. Where IWI, it might make more sense to do it room by room as you can afford it, as you move things. You're right that to some extent it takes a lesser skill set to install, but more and more as we move away from gas heating towards things like air source heat pumps, the technology requires the rooms to be airtight. And so you have to really take a whole house air tightness view. And it's an upskill. It's not that decorators and installers can't learn to do it and to measure for air tightness to be ready for these new technologies, but it is something that we've got to look at in terms of, we don't want to just go and tell everybody, oh, just put IWI in, you know, it'll be totally fine, because then if they take advantage of some of these air source programs, they might actually end up spending more if they've not made sure that all the heat isn't escaping the room. I guess alongside that, we are exploring some other electric heating properties as well to try to move away from air source heat pumps because they are so expensive. They're not suitable for flats, you know, unless you can do the entire building all at once. So we are exploring options for pilots to do that going forward. I will hand over to Daniel a little bit more about the Healthy Homes consultations. Yeah, and then happy to have any others.
Yep. Okay, I'll take the councillors' questions on healthy homes. So on the question of numbers, so initially, I believe the previous contract was scheduled for, made provision for 300 consultations, and these were exceeded. So the demand was there prior to the kind of increasing in prices or the coming increase. So then this extension, it's gone up to 500 consultations, and it's reflective of the kind of split between telephone and in-home. So currently there's more telephone consultations offered than in-home because we're finding patterns that more people are requesting them. But going forward with the 500, because the extension has sort of been relatively newly agreed. So we're looking to see the coming demand going forward, but we're also considering options to increase this number should this demand continue to go as expected over the winter months. We're looking to then extend this offer to more people and to offer more in-home consultations rather than telephone consultations, because we find anecdotally that they have a greater value to residents. So we're looking to hopefully, again, so see what kind of level of demand we see in the coming year, and then tailor what we offer going forward to either increase that and to hopefully to aim to provide the best value possible for residents. And then just on the question about residents who's English, who don't have maybe not English as their first language. So the green doctors who can go out to visit and do the consultations either telephone or in home. So I believe as a group there's 9 community languages that are spoken amongst the Green Doctors. So there's provision for those residents who maybe don't have the strongest kind of English or speak it as their first language. Because as I say, so Groundwork, who deliver the scheme, they do this. They work mainly in London, so I believe they're kind of they're geared towards the kind of different populations that we have in London.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Okay, Fabio.
So just one other thing I wanted to ask, just about, so in terms of the next bid being put forward, I think you have until the 11th of November. I think you were saying that you hadn't decided yet whether you would do it with the other boroughs, or whether you'd go separately, or whether you'd go with the GLA scheme. I was just wondering, what are the advantages of doing it with the other boroughs? What would be the advantage of even going alone or waiting and doing it as part of a GLA scheme? I guess what are the things that you're weighing up in terms of those different options? And in terms of the amount that you bid for next time, given that obviously and understandably with all the constraints, you've not been able to spend all the money that's been allocated I think on this tranche, will that impact in a negative way on how much money might be allocated in the next bid?
So there's a few different issues that go into this. The admin is not small, is one way to put it. This has been almost my entire job and my entire life round the clock for 2 years. So while I'm really proud of what we've done with Green Homes Grant, we are aware that we are a finite number of people, and the GLA have a little bit more resource or ease of getting resource in. So it's not that there isn't an admin budget. And actually, one of the advantages to Ealing leading these coalition bids has been that we have brought a considerable amount of funding in as sort of an administrative top slice. A fair bit of that goes to the project management, but it's left us with a bit of reserve to actually think about how can we best shape our team to run these big programs to make sure that we're reaching all the people that we want to reach. It's also been really helpful for us to go out to the supply network as a block, because if just Ealing went out and said, we think we've got 200 to 300 homes in Ealing that would qualify for this program, will you come work for us? A lot of the big suppliers they're just going to say no. They're not going to tender. They're not going to prioritize us. Where when I went to them as a block of 13 boroughs and we said, we've got 175,000 homes that we know qualify for this scheme, would you like to work with us for the next 2 years? Then they were actually lining up at our door. So that's really the advantage, is that it gives us a bit of the market. And the GLA scheme it's a bit newer. Warmer Homes is older, but they've just procured a new supplier. There's someone who is known well to us. We have a great relationship with them, but we've yet to see them actually deliver the scheme. They've only just started, where our scheme has now been running for 1.5 years. We know our supply chain's capacity. We know it's not where we would like it to be, but we still think it's quite far ahead a lot of other regions. And at least going forward with phase 3 and HUG, some other coalitions around London have dropped out. So the GLA will be going forward with us or without us, basically. But we know that some of the surrounding boroughs like Bucks and Essex and a few won't have programs. So some of the supply chain that's been dedicated to them will actually come back into West London with our managing agent. So I think that there's a big push to be part of a coalition for a lot of these projects. The reason we have the funding we have right now, we made a pretty ambitious bid with our phase 1 funding. By hook or by crook, we managed to spend it. I was really proud of us, but it was hard dang work. Phase 2 was run differently. So we didn't actually bid for that funding. the BASE, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, they based each borough's allocation on their fuel poverty numbers. So at that time, we had 12 boroughs in our coalition, and they told us how much they wanted to give us and asked if we could spend it. And we said, well, we've just done quite well for ourselves. We'll take it. And then there were about 8 months of delays in contracts because of some reasons that I won't bore you with, that were outside of Ealing's control. But once we actually got delivering, we're doing just fine. But because of those delays, we weren't able to spend it. So when the phase 3 and HUG funding came up, we had 13 boroughs. Camden decided to hitch their cart to our wagon, horse, whatever. And so we went back to BASE again and said, our 13 borough coalition in West London has 6.5% of Ealing's fund of the nation's fuel poverty. We would like 6.5% of your grant funding. And they gave it to us, which is great, but also a little bit scary. So we've sort of used that as a metric for how much of the piece of the pie we thought we deserved based on fuel poverty, which is what they had used before. I don't know that we will be that ambitious going forward. We've just had some invoices come in that are showing we're probably getting pretty darn close to £1 million in capital spend per month. We might actually exceed that next month because everyone has just been running flat out to try to close out the phase 2 scheme. So if we know that we can spend about $1 million a month and it's a 2-year delivery scheme, we could potentially bid for 25 million. I don't think we will. I think we'll actually go quite the other way and maybe ask for half of what we think we can deliver, because what we've seen with all of these programs is that there will always be other boroughs who underperform. And I would much rather be in a position where we have to go back and ask for some of the funding from other areas that haven't been as successful when they do sort of mid-scheme shuffles to say, okay, if you don't think you're going to spend your entire allocation, give it back to us, we'll reshuffle it and give it to boroughs that are spending more. So I think that's the tactic we would take with any future bids, to sort of underwhelm them a little bit, but also to show how successful we have been. And, I certainly think that for the residents who've gone through the program, it is transformational. 10,000, 15,000 pounds might not seem like loads, but if you've never been able to make any kind of improvements to your home because you're low income, you've maybe owned your house for 40 years, you're a pensioner, you've not had electricity or hot water or heating for years, you will get some thank yous. We've had some really grateful people come to us. So I know the advantage to running the program. The disadvantage to the next phase, the bid that's just about to open up, is that it's only for off-gas properties. And these are programs that are primarily based at electrifying rural homes. So while London does have some electrically heated homes, they tend to be mixed tenure flats. And it's really difficult to get everyone in those blocks to agree to works. So when we're looking at things like block affected works, if you can't get everyone, it's actually more expensive to go around people. So we just have to be really mindful for this round of funding to try to decide, is that where we want to spend our energy? Is trying to contact the same 2,000 or 3,000 off-gas properties that we've already spent the last 2 years targeting. It's not that we don't want to help them. We absolutely do. There's higher grant amounts of up to 25,000. But it is, when we sit down to do the cost benefits analysis, we're just trying to figure out what is the benefit to Ealing in us continuing to chase that. Aside from the admin, which, it's a boon to us and we get that, but I don't know that that alone is a reason enough to not go back in with the GLA. So yeah, I'll be doing some tables of maths over the next couple of weeks. And we'll bring that to people above me and we'll decide if that's the way to go. But I know that in just in the last 24 hours, government have said that there's another £1 billion of funding coming. It's just not quite clear if that's just for the eco program, which anyone can access, or if it's going to be for something for on-gas properties. And if it's for on-gas properties, I think we would just pounce on it. I don't think there is a downside because that's where the majority of our residents find themselves. But for off-gas properties, it's a little harder to justify chasing that funding again.
Okay, thank you very much. Just on behalf of the panel, I would like to thank Joanne, Tanya and Daniel for what's very interesting presentation. And I think it must be very frustrating in this day and age when there's the most need and the most want for, it's probably the worst that anybody in this room has seen for fuel poverty. The supply chains are just letting us down. It must be very frustrating. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, can I move on to the next item? The work programme. I believe it has been circulated for panel members. And I believe that at some stage there will be a visit to one of Ealing's food banks. Any further comments on the work programme? And then finally, the last one is the date of the next meeting, which will be the 8th of December. Okay.